Let's hear from Corinne Jean-Pierre at the White House right now.
In funding for women's health research. And now I'm going to turn it over to my NSC colleague, Admiral John Kirby, who will talk to you more about the news of North Korean soldiers traveling to Russia, today's historic announcement of the use of frozen Russian sovereign assets to support Ukraine, and other foreign policy matters. Admiral?
Afternoon, everybody. So just before I kick off on those issues, I do want to start by extending our thoughts to the victims of the horrible terrorist attack in Ankara, Turkey this morning. Our prayers are with all of those affected and their families, and of course also the people of Turkey at this very difficult time. Now, Turkish authorities, as they've said, are investigating this as a possible terrorist attack. And while we don't yet know the motive or who is exactly behind it, we strongly condemn this act of violence. Now, I think, as you have all heard earlier this morning, we have seen the public reporting indicating that North Korean soldiers are traveling to Russia to fight against Ukraine. We're working closely with our allies in understanding of this situation, but today I'm prepared to share what we know at this stage. We assess that between early to mid-October, North Korea moved at least 3,000 soldiers into eastern Russia. We assess that these soldiers traveled by ship from the Wonsan area in North Korea to Vladivostok, Russia. Soldiers then traveled onward to multiple Russian military training sites in East Russia, where they are currently on training. We do not yet know whether these soldiers will enter into combat alongside the Russian military, but this is certainly a highly concerning probability. After completing training, these soldiers could travel to western Russia and then engage in combat against the Ukrainian military. We have briefed the Ukrainian government on our understanding of this situation, and we're certainly consulting closely with other allies, partners, and countries in the region on the implications of such a dramatic move and on how we might respond. Expect to have more to share on all of that in the coming days. For the time being, we will continue to monitor this situation closely. But let's be clear. If North Korean soldiers do enter into combat, this development would demonstrate Russia's growing desperation in its war against Ukraine. Russia is suffering extraordinary casualties on the battlefield every single day, but President Putin appears intent on continuing this war. If Russia is indeed forced to turn to North Korea for manpower, this would be a sign of weakness, not strength, on the part of the Kremlin. It would also demonstrate an unprecedented level of direct military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, with security implications in Europe as well as the Indo-Pacific. As we have said before, Russia's cooperation with the North Korean military is in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions which prohibit the procurement of arms from North Korea and military arms training. This move is likewise a violation. At President Biden's direction, the United States continues to surge security assistance to Ukraine. In just the past week, which I think you've seen, the United States has announced more than $800 million in security assistance to meet Ukraine's urgent battlefield needs. Now, looking ahead, the United States is on track to provide Ukraine with hundreds of additional air defense interceptors, dozens of tactical air defense systems, additional artillery, significant quantities of ammunition, hundreds of armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, and thousands of additional armored vehicles, all of which will help keep Ukraine effective on the battlefield. And in coming days, the United States will announce a significant sanctions tranche targeting the enablers of Russia's war in Ukraine located outside of Russia. The Ukrainian military continues to fight bravely and effectively, and President Biden is determined to provide Ukraine with the support that it needs to prevail. To that end, the President announced today that of the $50 billion that the G7 committed to loan Ukraine back in June, the United States will provide a loan of $20 billion. The other $30 billion in loans will come from a combination of our G7 partners, including the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan. Now, this is unique. Never before has a multilateral coalition frozen the assets of an aggressor country and then harnessed the value of those assets to fund the defense of the aggrieved party, all while respecting the rule of law and maintaining solidarity. These loans will support the people of Ukraine as they defend and rebuild their country. And it's another example of how Mr. Putin's war of aggression has only unified and strengthened the resolve of G7 countries and our partners to defend shared values. And yep, that's it. Thank you. Sorry, I had an extra page in there and I wasn't sure where it was going.
Is the assessment that the presence of North Korean troops can have a meaningful trajectory on the war? And then secondly, you've said earlier even that it shows a sign of desperation on the Russians. But does it also demonstrate North Korea's commitment to this burgeoning alliance with Russia? And is that in and of itself a broadening and discouraging concern for America?
So on your first question, too soon to tell, Amr, what kind of an impact these troops can have on the battlefield, because we just don't know enough about what the intention is in terms of using them. So I think that's why I said at the top we're going to monitor this and watch it closely. To your second question, yeah, absolutely. As we've also said, yes, I've called this a sign of desperation and a sign of weakness. And it's not like Mr. Putin's being very honest with the Russian people about what he's doing here. I mean, Mr. Peskov, his spokesman, just the other day denied knowing anything about it. But we've also talked many, many times about the burgeoning and growing defense relationship between North Korea and Russia, and how reckless and dangerous we think that is, not only for the people of Ukraine, and clearly we'll watch to see what this development means for them, but also for the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you. With the U.S. diplomats in the region, Mr. Hochstein in Lebanon and the Secretary of State in Saudi Arabia now before Israel, do you believe there is a chance now for the ceasefire to be back on the table? And do you believe that with the demise of Mr. Sinwar and Hassan Nasrallah, you have better chances or worse chances for somebody to negotiate with?
You're talking about, I'm assuming, is with Gaza.
I mean, you have Lebanon and you have Gaza implementation 1701 and in Gaza.
I mean, look, the short answer to your question, Nadia, is yes, and we wouldn't be engaged in these diplomatic efforts if we didn't think there was still an opportunity here to get a ceasefire for Gaza that brings the hostages home and increases humanitarian assistance, and certainly a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And as for the implication that the deaths of the two leaders, Nasrallah and Sinwar, as President Biden said last week, that does open up, we believe should open up an opportunity to try to get there. But I don't want to sound too sanguine here. I'll let Secretary Blinken speak for his travels. He's still on the road. He talked about it a little bit today, that they had good constructive conversations, specifically with respect to Gaza while he was in Israel. But there's still a lot of work before us.
Okay, and one more quickly. The number of civilians killed in Gaza was 779 in the last 20 days, especially in Jabalia. And the total number is 100,000 between the dead and the wounded. 90% of Gaza is destroyed. Does the U.S. still believe that Israel's strategy in Gaza is working? And do you still support it?
We still support Israel's right and responsibility to defend itself against these threats, including the continued threat of Hamas. And we still urge Israel to be ever mindful of civilian casualties and the damage to civilian infrastructure. And we're going to continue to work with them to that end.
Has the U.S. made an assessment about the type of weapons training or what type of training the North Korean soldiers are undergoing in Russia that could potentially be used in Ukraine? And does this represent a new type of an agreement in terms of an information sharing agreement between the North Koreans and the Russians?
I don't believe we have a very specific assessment at this time of the exact nature of all the training. There's 3 sites that we assess right now that this first tranche of about 3,000 are being trained. I think I could go so far as to say that, at least in general terms, it's basic kind of combat training and familiarization. I think I could go as far as that and no further. But as I also said, we're going to monitor this and watch this closely. And obviously, if we have more information that we can share with you, we certainly will. To your second question about information sharing, as I've said before in answer to Amr, we have been watching this relationship grow and deepen now for many, many months. And the question that we're asking ourselves, and we don't have an answer for right now, is what does Kim Jong-un think he's getting out of this? And so you talked about information sharing. I mean, maybe that's part of this. Maybe it's technology. Maybe it's capabilities. We don't have a good sense of that, but that's what's so concerning to us is not only the concern for the impact on the war in Ukraine, but the impact that this could have in the Indo-Pacific with Kim Jong-un benefiting to some degree.
Can you talk about that just briefly? Like, how significant is this for the U.S. allies in the region and the U.S. as a whole?
Could be significant. Again, we don't know enough right now. So when you say region, I think you mean Indo-Pacific. Until we have a better sense of what the North Koreans at least believe they're getting out of this, as opposed to what they actually get, it's hard to know and to put a metric on exactly what the impact is in the Indo-Pacific. But it is concerning. It's been concerning. Certainly this development, this willingness of Kim to literally put skin in the game here. Soldiers in Russia for the potential deployment, and we haven't seen them deployed, but for the potential deployment, certainly would connote an expectation that he thinks he's getting something out of this.
You mentioned us discussing how we would possibly respond. What are the possibilities for how the U.S. could respond to this?
Well, for one thing, we're going to continue to surge security assistance, as I just mentioned in my topper. And you're going to continue to see, the President has made it clear that we're going to continue to provide security assistance all the way up to the end of his administration, for sure. So you're going to see that continue to flow, and we're talking to allies and partners about what the right next steps ought to be. I'm not at liberty today to go through any specific options, but we're going to have those conversations, and we have been.
And China is a critical trading partner to North Korea. What's the U.S. assessment for how China is looking at all of this?
We know President Xi and the Chinese are looking at this. One would think that if you take their comments at face value about desiring stability and security in the region, particularly on the Korean Peninsula, one would think that they're also deeply concerned by this development. But you can expect that we'll be communicating with the Chinese about this, and certainly sharing our perspectives to the degree we can, and gleaning theirs.
And local South Korean press is reporting that, according to intelligence, these troops, North Korean troops, lack understanding of modern warfare, such as drone attacks, and it's anticipated there will be a high number of casualties when deployed to the front lines.
Too soon to know. I mean, we don't really know what they're going to be used for, where they're going to, if they're going to deploy, where they're going to deploy, and to what purpose. I can tell you one thing, though: if they do deploy to fight against Ukraine, they're fair game. They're fair targets. And the Ukrainian military will defend themselves against North Korean soldiers the same way they're defending themselves against Russian soldiers. And so the possibility that there could be dead and wounded North Korean soldiers fighting against Ukraine is absolutely real if they get deployed.
Just to clarify something you said earlier about what Kim Jong-un possibly gets out of this, as far as you know, has he gotten anything in return?
Well, from this particular move, I can't speak to that, MJ. I don't think we have seen any specific, quid pro quo with respect to this provision of troops. But we know that he and Mr. Putin have, again, been growing in their defense relationship. And we know Mr. Putin has been able to purchase North Korean artillery. He's been able to get North Korean ballistic missiles, which he has used against Ukraine. And in return, we have seen, at the very least, some technology sharing with North Korea. But what this particular development means going forward, we just don't know. We're going to have to watch that.
And do you know if this came about because Putin specifically first asked for help, or whether it's that Kim Jong-un offered the help first?
Don't know what precipitated it, but I think it's important to remember that in the 3+ years that he's been fighting in and around Ukraine, Mr. Putin and his military has suffered 530,000 casualties. And as we're speaking today, he's losing casualties alone, not killed and wounded, 1,000 to 1,200 per day. Now, 530,000 is a lot. I mean, there were, in the American Civil War, there were like 620,000 killed. Just to put this into some perspective, this is 3 years fighting in Ukraine. 530 casualties is a lot. And he hasn't been fully transparent with the Russian people about this. And he hasn't been transparent at all with the Russian people about this particular move, about bringing in North Korean soldiers. So that he has to farm out the fighting to a foreign country, I think speaks volumes about how much his military is suffering and how uncertain he believes, how untenable he believes his situation is.
And I guess just, if you had to guess, what would the training even look like given the language barrier? And once these North Korean soldiers are deployed, like what would the command structure?
It's a great question. I wish we had an answer to it. You're not wrong to highlight the language barrier. I mean, these aren't even similar languages. They're going to have to overcome that. It's not like they have a long, productive history of working together as two militaries, even at all. So that's going to be a challenge. Command and control is going to be a challenge. And this is not a challenge that the Russians have even solved amongst themselves. They're still having command and control challenges, logistics and sustainment, getting things to the battlefield, keeping their troops in the field.
Of the many topics that can be talked about there at the White House, there we are hearing more about North Korean troops moving into Russia to give a boost to Russia's resistance in Ukraine. We saw CBS News' Willie Inman there in the room. He's asking questions about that.